Welcome back to Broadview. My name is Joseph. If you search on YouTube the name Raphael, you'll come across a kind-faced and sociable elderly person who has uploaded a ton of videos of him playing the accordion. But could you imagine that when he was 20 years old, he committed a crime that shocked the whole world? Now before we jump into it, please subscribe to the channel and click the little bell so that you won't miss out on any of our future content. Our story begins with an earthquake in August 1962 in southern Italy, when Raphael's village was reduced to debris. Raphael then moved to the US and hoped for a better life. 7 years elapsed in the blink of an eye, and on October 31st, 1969, Raphael was one day away from his 20th birthday. That day, Raphael dressed himself in camouflage uniform and went to the airport. He knew that in his backpack he had an MB rifle and hundreds of rounds of ammunition, making it impossible to board the plane through the security. So he deliberately bumped into a female flight attendant, and with his charming eyes and a few Italian jokes, he quickly made the attendant smitten, who then led Raphael to a boarding gate with no security checks required. Now at 1:30 a.m., Raphael boarded the Boeing 707. This was a night flight with many aboard sound asleep. A 23-year-old head stewardess, Charlene, was alerted when she spotted a rod sticking out from Raphael's strangely shaped backpack. Without disturbing any passengers, Charlene silently went to her colleagues and asked what the young man could have had in his backpack. She felt relieved when her colleague told her that it was a fishing rod, and she then went to the back of the plane. Soon after that, Raphael began taking action. He ducked in the bathroom with his backpack and skillfully loaded bullets into his rifle. When Charlene and another flight attendant were cleaning up the kitchen, Raphael broke in with his loaded rifle. As an experienced aircrew member, Charlene stayed composed. "You shouldn't have that thing," she said to Raphael. And Raphael's response was to show her a 7.62mm long bullet and order her to take him to the cockpit. So Charlene went to the cockpit with Raphael following. When Charlene came across two of her colleagues, she told them, "The man behind me has a gun," and signaled them not to panic. Then the other two flight attendants immediately made way for them, and Charlene started knocking on the cockpit door. Raphael dashed into the cockpit as soon as the door opened. He pointed his rifle at the captain, Donald Cook, co-pilot Wenzel Williams, and then the flight engineer as well. Williams had once been a soldier before, so he knew right away that Raphael was a young soldier who just came back from the Vietnam War. So he told Charlene to exit and opened himself up for Raphael's requests. Raphael ordered them to reverse directions and go back to New York and then go to Rome. The captain immediately followed his orders, but meanwhile explained to Raphael that the fuel was not enough to go to New York, and that none of the three pilots had an international license. So the captain suggested to refuel at Denver, and then to go to New York. At the same time, the co-pilot and the flight engineer assisted in the conversation, making the atmosphere more and more relaxed. So Raphael began to put down his guard and agreed to the suggestion. After Charlene came out, she wisely told her colleagues, "Hey, what you thought you saw was not actually true. I wasn't taken hostage. Don't disturb our passengers." Afterwards, the flight attendants attempted to negotiate with Raphael. "How about we let all the passengers get off the plane at Denver so that we don't disrupt their trips? It's good enough that we, the flight attendants, accompany you." Surprisingly, Raphael accepted the suggestion, but he requested that one stewardess remain on the plane with him. He wanted to choose Charlene, but the captain, on the other hand, wanted Roberta, who he was more familiar with, to stay. In the end, the captain even started arguing with Raphael, making the atmosphere tense up, and Raphael raised the rifle again. At this moment, another stewardess, Tracy, happened to come in and offer coffee. After seeing why they were arguing, she said, "Why not let me stay, as my boyfriend happens to be in New York right now, and I can go visit him along the way." And to everyone's surprise, Raphael agreed. After that, the cabin once again eased up, and the plane safely landed in Denver. Raphael stood by the exit with his rifle raised, watching the passengers exit the plane. All the passengers were led into a dark corridor as they got off the plane, and at the end of the hallway, around the corner, was a bright room full of FBI agents. All of the FBI agents seemed extremely nervous, so the stewardess told them, "The hijacker is a very polite young man. For the sake of goodness, don't enrage him." Right then, a passenger suddenly remembered that he forgot one of his jackets in the plane. So he went back and asked Raphael if he could retrieve his jacket, and Raphael said, "Of course." Everything was calm during the stay in Denver, and the plane quickly refueled and departed. At that point, there were only 5 people on the plane: the captain, the co-pilot, the flight engineer, Tracy, and Raphael, all heading for New York. On their way to New York, Raphael seemed to have completely trusted everyone. He went to the first-class cabin, put down his rifle, and started to take a relaxed break. However, as soon as the plane landed in New York, the situation spiraled out of control. As you might have imagined, more than 100 FBI agents were awaiting Raphael, and they already devised a plan to raid the plane. They were determined to not let an aircraft be hijacked out of the US. So they slowly approached the plane posing as mechanics. Meanwhile, through the cabin porthole, signaled the captain to trick Raphael to get closer to the cabin porthole. But the captain thought it was an extremely foolish idea to do so. Afterwards, he told the New York Times that the FBI agents' plan to raid the plane almost killed everyone. These idiots just decided by themselves what to do without acquiring any information, and that the trust they had built up with Raphael in the past 6 hours was simply destroyed. While seeing that the agents were approaching closer and closer, the captain frantically indicated them to leave immediately, but to no avail. Suddenly, a gunshot pierced the silence and everyone was stupefied. No one knew what was happening. But the gunshot effectively made the FBI agents back up. At this critical moment, 2 pilots who held international licenses, Billy Williams and Richard Hastings, forcibly pushed the FBI agents away, covered their heads with their arms, and risked their lives by slowly walking into the plane. Their courage was honorable. Even when the hijacker fired a shot, they still steadfastly entered the plane. After boarding, the 2 pilots immediately agreed with Captain Cook's decision to not fuel up and just leave the place without delay. Otherwise, who knew what foolish action the FBI would take in the interim? When the plane took off, the situation calmed down again. Everyone realized that the gunshot was purely accidental, and that Raphael didn't know what had happened either. But he said that he instinctively got nervous and inadvertently pressed the trigger. The bullet went through the roof of the cabin and hit the oxygen tank. But luckily it didn't penetrate the tank, otherwise it would have caused a deadly explosion. The aircraft landed in Bangor Airport in Maine to refuel and took off again successfully, leaving the United States and entering international airspace. On their way across the Atlantic Ocean, the hijack had already been underway for over 9 hours. And everyone on the plane became friendly. They lightheartedly chatted and played cards with each other. When they crossed the region of Ireland, October 31st had become November 1st, and Raphael had also turned 20 years old. It was then that he finally revealed the true reason for the hijack. Raphael hadn't been recognized since he moved to the United States. In 1966, Raphael was 18 years old. He joined the US Army and wished to obtain a true identity by doing so. He was immediately sent to the war front of Vietnam. He said he performed great bravery on the battlefield and rescued his comrades on several occasions, and was eventually awarded the Cross of Gallantry. But after returning home, like many other comrades, his mental health was crushed by the cruel trauma of war. Worst of all was that he received no recognition because people had opposed the war. Imagine the weight on a veteran's mind if he were to question the necessity of a war that resulted in so much bloodshed. His faith in the army and its seemingly noble fight for liberty began to collapse. At the same time, he was preparing a trip to Italy where he would be taking care of his father, who was suffering from cancer. Before he left, he planned to withdraw all the savings, which was about $800 in his account, that was just enough to return to his homeland. To his surprise, the bank teller told him that there was only $600 available in his account. His pleas for help got him nowhere. His faith and hope had dwindled. That night, he broke into a store on the military base and stole $200 of goods as the compensation that he felt he was owed. Unfortunately for him, he did so after drinking 8 beers and fell asleep inside the store. He was caught the next morning. Not only was his return to Italy no longer an option, but he was also sent to a military court. He decided to escape secretly to return to Italy. His American dream had completely fallen apart. He was scheduled for his military court trial on the day of the hijacking. At 5 o'clock in the morning on November the 1st, the plane landed in Rome. Raphael requested a weaponless police officer to drive a police car to come see him. After a while, a vehicle parked near the plane. Out of it emerged Pietro Gulli, a deputy customs official who had volunteered to meet the hijacker. He walked up the steps to the plane with his hands up, and Raphael emerged to meet him. Raphael walked off the ladder and said goodbye to Captain Cook and the others, saying, "So long, Don. I'm sorry I caused you all this trouble." Cook replied, "That's okay. It's not something personal between you and me." Raphael was holding his rifle and walked with Guli towards the car. The 6 people on the plane eventually breathed a sigh of relief as they saw the 2 men off afar. They were free again, but they all hoped the next stage of the hijacking would end safely, for both Raphael and his new hostage. To this point, the historical hijacking had finally come to an end. Raphael's story continues on. 4 police cars closely followed the vehicle hijacked by Raphael on the streets of Rome. Raphael was heading for his hometown in the countryside of Naples. After successfully dumping 4 police cars, Raphael's vehicle drove into a dead end. He released the hostage and ran towards his hometown. Hundreds of policemen, countless police dogs, and helicopters carried out a thorough search for the hijacker in the suburban Rome. 5 hours later, he was found by a priest. It turned out that Raphael took off his military uniform at the end of his escape, dropped his rifle, and hid in the church to seek shelter from the priest. The priest quickly recognized the boy, who was Raphael, as he was saying that he wanted to go home. The priest nodded and took his hand, walking out of the church. They were surrounded by the police who wanted to detain Raphael. "Paese, my people, why are you arresting me?" Raphael shouted in Italian to his countrymen. Upon Raphael being arrested, the Italian authorities had 2 options. One was to extradite Raphael back to the United States, where he might face the death penalty. The other was he would be prosecuted in Italy. But before the police prosecuted Raphael, he was portrayed by the media as a hero and admired by almost all Italians. Look, an Italian boy spared no effort to return to his motherland. What else can be more outstanding than to express your love for your own country? In the court, his attorney said that he believed a great Italian judge would understand the harm a foreign war had brought to this Italian and would forgive him. In the end, Raphael was sentenced to 7 years in prison, only for illegally bringing weapons into the country. But later his sentence was commuted, and he was released in less than 2 years. Reporters flocked to Raphael on the day of his release from prison, and Raphael's name became well known. Hold up, Raphael's legend is not over yet. He worked as a bartender in Rome after being released from prison, and married the daughter of the bar owner, who later gave birth to his son. The couple opened a pizza restaurant named Hijacking. In 1980, another earthquake struck Raphael's hometown. For 3 times in 2 weeks, he drove 300 miles away to the earthquake-impacted regions to deliver relief supplies. In February 1985, his wife was pregnant with their 2nd child. After being admitted to the hospital in labor, she and her newborn son died as a result of medical malpractice. Raphael was overwhelmed by sorrow and anger that negligence had cost him his wife and son's life. He even bought a gun on the black market and prepared to launch a violent revenge attack at a prominent medical conference outside of Rome. During this period, a friend of his helped him out of the distress and inspired Raphael. He kept reading the Bible to Raphael, who finally chose God and gave up the revenge. In 1999, Raphael returned to the United States to meet his old comrades in the Vietnam War. The United States authorities did not prosecute him. Raphael still had a wish to find the crew members who experienced his hijacking and to apologize to them one by one. One day in the summer of 2009, Charlene, who was a retired flight attendant then, received an invitation. Would she be willing to meet the man who had once held her up at gunpoint? Her first reaction to the invitation was shock. Then, of course, Charlene chose to forgive Raphael. In August 2009, she drove 150 miles to attend their reunion. She saw Raphael and Deputy Captain Williams of her crew. Captain Cook did not come to the party as he said he had already forgiven Raphael on the plane. After the meeting, before they parted, Raphael handed them both a copy of the New Testament. Inside, he had written, "Thank you for your time so much. I appreciate your forgiveness for my actions that put you in harm's way. Please accept this book that has changed my life. God bless you so much, Raphael Minichiello." Many years have passed, and Raphael is now an old man. Either a hijacker or a hero, whichever you may see him as, his legendary story is moving. Sometimes heroes and criminals are merely one line apart, and that defining line is whether compassion or evil thoughts arise in one's heart. By guarding and cultivating our inner kindness, it will illuminate the road ahead of us, even at our darkest moments. Even in the midst of tribulation, if we can still remember to correct our thoughts, we can change our course of life. I also get from this story that even if we've made horrible mistakes in our past, we're not defined by them. Faith in the divine can always give us the hope and direction that may not be found elsewhere. Thank you for watching. Have you got any other fascinating stories or events you'd like me to cover? Definitely leave your comments down below, and we'll see you next time.